everyone, welcome back to another episode of Fluffy Talks Tabletop. Today we're going to talk homebrewing. I can already hear the groans from people that are watching this video later, as there's no followers right now, or no watchers right now. But we're going to talk homebrewing, and you guys are going to sit here and listen to it, or you're just going to go click a different video. I don't care. So, I started doing homebrewing when I was probably when I would have been a sophomore in college. I got into Dungeons and Dragons when I was in, I think, my last year of middle school. And it was a lot of fun, and I got really into it. And I started being a dungeon master in high school when I had a group of friends that really wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons but didn't have a dungeon master. So I taught myself how to dungeon master, and it was more complicated than I thought. There's a lot of table reading and a lot of table memorization. So I got into homebrewing eventually, and it was a lot of fun. And today I'm going to talk about some of the homebrew campaigns that I've done, what problems I had, why I made the decisions that I did, etc., etc. So to start with, we're going to talk about one of my Pathfinder campaigns, which has the fantastically creative title of No Magic Pathfinder in my in my Google Docs. There's a lot of core mechanic changes that I made. I changed a lot of the basics, and a lot of stuff got reskinned or renamed or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and read basically through the primer. I'm not going to read it word for word, but I'm going to read it through the primer, and we'll talk about some of the things that are different. The first thing that's on here is a disclaimer that indicates that some of these changes are very, very, very different. The first thing is characters are going to be starting at level 5. This represents your character completing the entirety of their apprenticeship to learn their trade or their skill or whatever. Also, I should have pointed this out super duper early, but this is a campaign where the main the main money system is actually silver. 1 silver is essentially equivalent to a gold in Pathfinder, except that some of the high-end materials and things like that have their gold value instead. The idea here was to kind of reduce the impact that money had on campaigns, but still make everybody kind of track purchases that they wouldn't necessarily track in Dungeons and Dragons or something like that. I'm not entirely sure why I made that aesthetic choice, but I really liked it. So everyone starts with 300 silver pieces, a set of armor suitable for their character, a weapon with the tagline of steel, or tagline, with the enhancement of steel, which I'll explain that later, but I adjusted magic items. We'll come back to that in a minute. Any gear that would reasonably apply to the character's day-to-day uses. This does not include standard trail rations. See food below. I think the biggest and most terrifying change that I made was hit points. Everyone receives their full hit points from their hit dice at first level, but everyone gets 1d3 plus con hit points every level after that. This is a very low hit point game, and bad things will happen. I messed with the classes a little bit. The classes are listed as follows. Man-at-Arms, which is the same as Fighter. Woodsman, which is the same as the Ranger with the Skirmisher build. Minstrel is the same as Bard. They lose their magic. Message me for details. There's a whole separate write-up page on that. Knight, which is the same as Cavalier. Scout is the same as Rogue. Brute is the same as Barbarian. And Martial Artist is the same as Monk. These classes are supposed to represent specific training in a specific set of skills, except for Brute, and usually require formal training from either a master, a school, or some other kind of formal training. So some of the other alternate rules that I'm using are, I changed up how food works. There's a couple different types of food. Fresh meat, fresh vegetables, cheeses and nuts, dried breads, dried vegetables, and dried meat. The idea is that perishable items expire in 3 days. Non-perishable items don't expire for the most part. Right, they do not expire. And the idea is that you have to eat 2 different food groups or food types for every meal. If you start eating the same thing every meal, you'll start to get fatigued, which will then stack into exhausted, and then you start to lose the amount of hit points that restore overnight. And without healing magic, your only way of restoring hit points is, you know, to sleep. So that's a real thing, and it kind of makes it a little terrifying. I wanted this game to be very, like, one attack kind of ruins your day and means that you're going to have to, you know, suck it up and deal with stuff. One meal's worth of food normally costs around 2 copper pieces. Armor as DR. This is one of my all-time favorites. Armor now only grants half its bonus to AC. The other half goes to DR. Armor as DR is actually taken out of the Unearthed Arcana from Classic 3.5, and along with the damage soaking rules, it's one of my all-time favorite things, or rule sets to play with, mostly because it grants DR very, very, very early in the game, and kind of gives you a little bit more resistance to damage. I mean, damage resistance, but there you go. Also, it means that squishy casters are more likely to be stabbed to death, whereas big brutes like fighters and things like that are more likely to be bludgeoned into unconsciousness, especially if you're stacking that with the damage-soaking rules, which I'll talk about in a minute. Injury thresholds. When a character loses a quarter of his total hit points, he begins to take penalties. At 75% of full health, you take a -2. At 50, it's -4. And at 25%, it's -6. Also, I borrowed the injuries concept. I don't remember where I saw this, and I'd love to be able to cite the source, so if you know where this rule is from, please let me know. If a character takes damage equal to his constitution score plus his level, he must pass a fortitude save equal to the damage dealt or receive an injury. Injuries start out minor, but repeated strikes to the same area can make them worse. Injuries are rolled on the injuries table. I probably should have pulled that up, shouldn't I? The injuries table was not imported into my Google Drive. Moving on. No magic. All classes with magic have been dropped. No magic items exist. Magic items cannot be crafted with any item crafting feats. Potions and scrolls have been removed from the game. I don't think I missed anything there, but the idea is pretty self-explanatory. In addition, to make up for that, I have manipulated the magic item charts to work as follows. They now consist of non-magical enhancement bonuses. Instead of the standard +1 through +5 bonuses of magic weapons, a new list has been compiled. +0 weapons are referred to as iron. Steel weapons are what used to be +1s. +2s have become water quench steel. 3 oil quench steel, 4 hardened steel, which I didn't really think about the names very well, and 5 pattern welded steel. In addition, armor has the same stack, with 0 being common, +1 being reinforced, 2 being strong, 3 being militia grade, 4 being well-made, and 5 being exceptional. In addition, some magical abilities of armor and weapons have been converted to a non-magical variety, and essentially what I did, I wish I would do that, was go through the list and see how many of the magical abilities I could justify without the use of magic. These are not in the primer, but I do have the list. There are things like Impervious, which makes the weapon protected from damage and decay and things like that, which is pretty easy to do. Bane is specifically designed to take advantage of an enemy's anatomy against a designated foe. The weapon's enhancement bonus is +2, better than its actual bonus. It also deals an extra 2d6 points of damage against such foes. Only one creature type may be selected, and it must be specific. I figured that Bane could be like specific weapon shapes and things like that that are very conducive to fighting specific types of enemies. And it goes through like that. There's also a tool that I particularly like. A weapon that is also a tool has part of it built to be used as a tool for a specific skill. It grants a bonus equal to its enhancement modifier to 1 skill. And I have a big list of these. Serrated, Terrifying, Throwing, Defiant, Weighted, Rending, things like that could be explained by the weapon's shape or the way that it's made instead of just magic. So this made for a really fun setting where everything was kind of terrifying because nobody had that many hit points. And there was no magic, so there was no healing. So if you needed to heal up, the best way to do it was to sit around a campfire and eat food and hope that you healed. And by hope, I mean, of course, eat decent amounts of food and things like that. And it made the characters really think about going into combat a little bit more carefully, which was a lot of fun because I hate combat sims. So it made it very, very interesting. I do still run this session, or this game occasionally, but I don't have any players for it right now. But it is a lot of fun, and it's a very interesting setting. So I used to build a lot of crazy Pathfinder settings like this, which had crazy rules and sometimes even character sheet manipulation. That sheet had the magic area removed on it, and instead I put a little table to track what food you were carrying, because that shit was really, 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 really important. So that was kind of a very interesting and unique setting, and probably one of the most severely modified Pathfinder games that I've ever built. But one of my favorite rules to ever use in any setting is the soak value for armor. And the way that soak value works is that regardless of whether you're using it with armor's DR or not, which I love to do, basically the armor's enhancement bonus, or the armor's, total bonus to AC becomes its soak value. And whenever you take damage, the first X points of damage, where X is your soak value, are converted to non-lethal. This is very useful at low levels because it means that characters are more likely to get knocked out than they are to actually straight up die. And the more you start playing, soak values don't really go up all that much, but attacks start dealing more damage, and the threat of death is very real, as opposed to, you know, a kobold that keeps hitting you for 4 damage, 2 of which get DR'd and 2 of which become non-lethal because of your soak value, and you end up not taking any real damage But later on, when you're being dealt 50 and 60 points of damage, those little mitigations are useful and very helpful, but at the end of the day, they're always not enough. So armor is DR, and blast hit. Armor soaking for non-lethal damage. There we go, non-lethal damage conversion. Are two of my favorite Pathfinder rules to use, just because they're off the wall and very interesting. And like I said, these are both from the Unearthed Arcana, but you can modify them for Pathfinder simply by importing them directly. They don't require any changes. But I should bring this up when it comes to armor as DR, because you can't split points. If armor has an odd number, then you want to put that in the AC bonus. So something that gives you +5 to your AC will give you 2 DR and 3 AC. But again, this is really, really meta, so let's step away from Pathfinder for a minute and talk about World of Darkness, where I find I have a lot more fun, and it's a little bit easier to build custom settings. We'll start with the custom setting that I use for Scarab, and that is the collections department. And I do have custom character sheets, although these custom character sheets are pretty much the same as a standard mortal character sheet. Open this up. Yeah, so the only difference between this sheet and the standard mortal sheet, which I'm looking at the vampire sheet and doing the conversion in my head, is humanity has been replaced with aptitude, which is a stat specific to the game. Blood pool has been replaced with mana and put in a slightly better place, being moved from here to here. Willpower made its way to the bottom, and I moved backgrounds into the middle and put the magical abilities called Numina over here. And the way that this works, it's kind of like Mage, except not really. In World of Darkness, you have 9 base ability scores, which we call attributes: strength, dexterity, stamina, charisma, manipulation, appearance, perception, intelligence, and wits. But in this game, and also in Waverly College, there's another one. It's called aptitude, and whenever you make a roll in World of Darkness, you take the skill, talent, or knowledge that you are using and add it to one of your attributes or base ability scores. This lets you essentially bypass the only one die available to you thing, and also lets you make rolls on talent, skills, and knowledges that you have no dots in, as long as you have a decent attribute to go along with it. For example, this one is my competition archer build, and it has 4 dots in dexterity, but it doesn't have... I'm yawning again, I'm sorry. Any dots in security. So rolling to pick a lock is just going to be 4 dexterity, which that's not bad. The idea here is that whenever you roll your Numina, or your magical abilities, you roll dots in Numina plus aptitude. But contrary to every other ability in the game, or every other dice roll in the game, you can only use a number of successes equal to your dots in your Numina. If you spend all of your XP filling your entire aptitude bar so that you have 10, and you only have 1 dot in your Numina, when you roll the dice, it doesn't matter how many successes you get, you can only use 1 for your Numina. And that was done specifically to kind of limit the usefulness of aptitude and make it so that characters that wanted to, I don't want to say become overpowered, but characters that wanted to increase their magical abilities have to do it by increasing specifically their magical abilities and not increasing just one stat that boosts them all. So apart from that, that's pretty much the only big difference on this character sheet. Apart from a little bit of general appearance, I put the collections department at the top, along with the scarab symbol on it. So that's a thing. Let's talk my next game, Wyverley College, because the collections department has very little modifications from Mortals. Wyverley College is a little bit different, and you can see this character sheet this is actually one of the prototype character sheets, so it is printed crooked, and there are some issues, like up here, the lines that are supposed to divide stuff go through the word because the white space didn't come out. Same with, like, advantages right here. This character sheet is probably the second most heavily modified character sheet I've ever built. The first being what was originally called No Mere Mortals, and eventually became known as the Confidence Game. But that character sheet is very similar to this one, so we're going to talk about this one. Apart from some font changes and things like that, this game uses the Vice and Virtue system, so at the top I have removed Nature and Demeanor and instead put Vice and Virtue. It's a method for regaining willpower. If you don't know what Vice and Virtue is, if you do your Vice, you get 1 willpower back. If you do your Virtue, you get all your willpower back. Let's see. The first thing that I did was, because this game takes place on a college campus for humans and non-humans with magical aptitude, I removed occult, which is a knowledge, and replaced it with supernatural to give a better idea of what it does. Also, it's not marked on here for some unknown reason. Oh, because this is the prototype. I'm dumb. But you actually start with 1 dot in supernatural for free. This game does use merits and flaws, so I didn't really mess with that so much. The backgrounds are identical, except in the primer. They're identical on the character sheet. In the primer, there are differences in the different kinds of backgrounds, some of which have been modified, some of which have been added. The basic idea is we dropped all the ones that were specific to, like, just Vampire or just Mage or things like that. And then we added in Treasure, which gives you a magic item to start with, Library, Laboratory, and Age, which lets it works kind of like Generation in Vampire, in that it lets your character be a little bit older, except that the only thing that does here is give you, like, knowledge of past events and things like that. I completely lost my train of thought. And the last one is certification. Oh, and companion. I forgot about companion. Certification gives you some sort of certification that would give you access to some organization or equipment or something like that that mortals don't normally have. And, of course, companion gives you some kind of companion, whether it is an artificial intelligence that you've built, or like a spirit deer that follows you around, or maybe it's a ghost that you've enslaved, or something along those lines. I was thinking what I wanted to do for the game, and yeah, it remembered me. I remembered. I can't talk. It remembered me. I remembered a game that I played when I was younger, and one of the characters had enslaved the ghost of Jimmy Hoffa, and he made for a very, very interesting mechanic. So we really liked that, and I wanted to include that in this. So I went with I went specifically with companion to kind of build that out. Under virtues, I have no idea why on regular ones virtues are so spaced out. And I needed something to put on the bottom bar, but I didn't have any room because I had already like taken up a bunch of extra space. So I stacked up all the virtues and put my new thing, Investiture, right here. Investiture is a mechanic that I designed. If you want to make your magical effects permanent in any way, you have to spend Investiture on it, as opposed to burning up willpower. I also removed disciplines out of advantages. I put them under the bottom bar. Merits and flaws wound up here, and magics wound up down here. So those two kind of got switched, except that backgrounds are normally here. I don't know why all of my sheets have backgrounds in the middle. I think that's a Mortals thing. Mana, aptitude, which is the same setup as this page, except that I didn't bother with dots and boxes. I just went with just boxes. Willpower, I gave a maximum mana location. Advantage and disadvantage I already talked about. But over under health, there is material weakness. And material weakness is the one thing that deals aggravated damage to you no matter what. So this was a very unique homebrew setup in that I had to do a lot of character sheet modification. I revamped the magic system entirely, and it took me about 4 months to completely do just the magic system and its sort of playtesting, I guess is the right word for it. Virtual combat scenarios, if you'll excuse a joke from Monster Hunter. One of the big things that was really important to me in this game was allowing characters to play all sorts of different crazy humanoid creatures. So I built a big table of 54 individual races, and this is the kind of stuff that I should really have pulled up before I started talking, but, you know, I can pull it up pretty quickly. So I've got there. I'll read out the categories instead of every individual race. But I have the demi-humans. These are in alphabetical order-ish. The demi-humans are they're your vampires and your werewolves. But I also have shades and the Morriganni. Shades are kind of this weird creature that doesn't cast a shadow, but they look relatively human. And the Morriganni are children of the Morrigan. They know a lot about battles and wars. And they get this really neat thing where they can turn into a raven-ish. Then I have your infernals. These are your basic demons. There's some weird kind of lore behind the fact that they're more the remnants of an army that advocated for design by chaos or natural design instead of intelligent design, whereas the seraphim or angels are the remnants of an army that fought for the idea that everything in the world was designed intelligently. So try and ditch the angels and demons thing. And some of these take a little bit of, and by a little bit I mean a lot, of ideas from the Chronicles of Nick. So there are a bunch of those. Elementals, relatively self-explanatory, although I got all the way into running this game for, I think, 6 or 7 months, once a week, before somebody pointed out that I had missed air elementals. So that was hilarious. Also included wraiths up there. They're fear elementals. I think they're kind of cool. I have the Fae, which is a constantly updating list because people are always like, hey, how come you don't have this Fae? Because I'm working on that. Give me like 10 seconds. And then I made a second subset of the Fae, the Sons and Daughters of Seasons. There are 4 of them. They correspond to 1 of each season. The Heralds. In this game, there are the 4 disasters. The 4 disasters were sent out after one of the major wars of power, or whatever you want to call them, to kind of clean up and fix things that were broken. The Heralds are the children of the 4 disasters and humans. So there's 4 of them. famine, plague, death, and conquest. I went with conquest instead of war just because it was a little bit cleaner sounding to me. Then you have your regular old humans that have some magical aptitude. I won't say I stole Seventh Sons of Seventh Sons, but I definitely ported the idea from the book The Last Apprentice, not the movie Seventh Son. I hope that all of the people that worked on that, if you'll excuse a quote, magically survive a terrible car accident and then magically don't survive a minor fender bender on the way home from the hospital. So you've got your regular humans, witches, mages, shield bearers, which are humans that actually found a shield bearer shield. They're mainly defensive race. I say race, that's just what I have them listed as. They have a really interesting setup where they could kind of reflect spells back sometimes, and they get a magic shield. I tried my best to bring in the Abhorsen from the Sabriel series by Garth Nix. I think I did a pretty good job with the Asdin and Asdar, which are sort of ports of the Aes Sedai from the Wheel of Time, because I kind of liked the idea that magic would work differently for different genders of the same race. So we brought them in. There's one independent race, the Iraqi. They're spider people. I had no idea where to put them, so I made an independent category. The Seraphim, which I talked about beforehand. And then the Sireni, which are which are plant people. They don't eat, with the exception of the Nepenthe, which are based off of carnivorous plants, which eat pretty much everything. They mainly just hang out in sunlight and drink water. I have the final list here. Wait a minute. I've missed an entire category, and I don't know how I did that. I know exactly how I did that. I'm looking at a different copy that was edited differently. So the ones that I'm missing are the hunters, and the idea here is that the hunters have unique abilities that make them better at hunting down some of these creatures. Let's see if this is the one with hunters. This is not the one with hunters. This is the one with hunters. So yeah, they're mainly resistant to what they hunt. They heal using the supernatural rate instead of the mortal rate. They age like immortals. Which in this game there are immortals, which are creatures that don't really die of aging but can still be killed. And then there's the true immortals, which don't age, and etc., etc. It's complicated. But the hunters get this unique ability where they can kind of resist and break free of powers used on them by whatever they hunt. Also, could not for the life of me think of a name for people that hunt fairies. And my brain was like, hey, you've read Mistborn, use Haze Killer. And I'm like, that sounds dumb. But I ended up using Haze Killer because I couldn't think of anything better. And this gave me a final setup of 61 individual races to play. Each one has their own separate appearance, their own advantage, disadvantage, and 3 individual racial powers. I tried to stick to this formula to make it pretty easy to power through making all of these, because I really needed to finish the list so that people could actually play the game. And it ended up being a lot of fun, and it was a really just interesting thing to create for me. That kind of covers Wyverley College, but there's another setting that I want to talk about for World of Darkness, and if anyone ever wants to play one of these settings or run one of these settings, let me know, and I will PM you the documentation and things like that. The last one is the Confidence game, and the Confidence game uses a separate system that I designed The basic idea is, if you've seen the show Leverage, you kind of know where I'm going with this. Each of the characters was a professional thief of some kind or another on their last job. Something went wrong and they were all arrested or something. The point is that a man named Arthur Maxwell has managed to get their charges dropped and released from prison or whatever on the condition that they work for him. He's an ex-criminal defense attorney for art theft who turned to a life of crime when he realized how corrupt the system was and how easy it was to game. So the motivation for the party working together is to make a crap ton of money. This game contains no magic, but it does have a skill system. Dots in skills are bought the same way and for the same price as vampiric disciplines. Skill points used to fuel these skills are bought for 5 experience per block of 5. So you buy them at a 1-to-1, but you can only buy them 5 at a time. The explanation for dice splitting is in here because it's very important. Retainers was swapped out for assets. Because you have to track every individual dollar in this game, there is no use for resources. So to make resources useful, the idea is that each dot gives a higher starting monetary value, which can be pre-spent on your gear. You can also assign dots and resources to gear items. You'll still receive the full monetary value for the dots. As an example, a character with 3 dots and resources would have $500,000 to start with and be able to buy a gear out of that before the game starts, as well as receive either a 3-dot piece of gear, a 2 and a 1-dot piece, or 3 1-dot pieces. The table is as follows. And then blah, 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 blah. That's pretty much the whole thing there, except for the skill system. And the skill system, the idea that I designed was that there are a couple different types of playing a thief, or playing a professional con artist. And I decided to borrow from Leverage here, and also a little bit from Hustle. So I have your mastermind, your thief, your grifter, your hacker, your hitter, but I also have the roper, which is the extraneous man. These guys are extra hands for use in different kinds of situations. And each one has at least 2 paths. I think everyone but the hitter has 2 paths. Masterminds have forgery and teamwork. Thieves have cat burglary and pickpocketing. Grifters have conversation and disguise. Hackers have tech and circumvention. Ropers have assistance and freelancing. You can build your roper either to be a constant help to everyone else or give them the ability to go do other things. Hitters have weapons, subdual, and a unique third one called One-Man Army, which gives you bonuses if you are outnumbered. And I'll read a couple of these skills out to kind of give you a good idea. We're going to go back up to the roper. So the first dot ability in assistance is Helping Hand. Burn a skill point to add an extra die to a roll that you are assisting with. For freelancing, it's On My Own. Burn a skill point to add a die to any roll for any ability that an ally has more dots in you than you do. I really need to work on the language for that. But the idea is that if you have to go out on your own and let's say you have to pick a lock, if somebody else is better at it than you are, you can burn a skill point for On My Own. The 2-dot ranks are Distraction for assistance. Burn a skill point when causing a distraction for an ally to cause all valid targets to become distracted without a roll, instead of just whatever target you're on. For freelancing, it's Handle It. Burn a skill point to reduce the difficulty of a roll that an ally failed and abandoned. You can reduce the difficulty by 1 for yourself. The ally must no longer be involved in this scenario. So if somebody tries to pick a lock and they have trouble with it, they can leave and you can handle it. Third dot power, blackout. This is, This is assistance. Try it now. Burn a skill point to allow an ally to re-roll any check involving a device or object. One of my favorites. Under freelancing, I have basic skill set. Burn a skill point to use a 1 or 2 dot skill that an ally possesses. You must still spend the skill point for this skill, but it essentially lets you burn 2 skill points to use something on someone else's skill list, as long as it's only a 1 or 2 dot ability. Oh, I'm receiving a phone call. Oh, I'll get that in a minute. Anyways, the 4 dot ability for this one is verification in assistance. Burn a skill point when confirming an ally's identity in a reasonable fashion to automatically succeed on the roll. The idea here was to create a scenario in which you could vouch for someone else's false identity. Verification makes it basically an automatic success as long as it's a reasonable fashion. Breaking into a building by pretending to be an auditor and his assistant, that assistant could be the roper and they could have verification. For freelancing, there's advanced skill set. It's exactly the same as basic skill set. Burn a skill point to use any 1 or 2 dot skill, regardless of whether an ally possesses it or not, or any 3 or 4 dot skill that an ally possesses. You must still spend a skill point to use that skill. So for 2 skill points, you can use any 1 or 2 dot skill on the table, regardless of whether an ally has it or not, or you can get a 3 or 4 dot skill that an ally already possesses. Lastly, there's backup, which is the 5 dot skill, which is the exception to the standard setup for how my 5 dot skills work. And then that allows you... Oops, that was weird. This allows you to give any number of skill points to any ally that you are working with. This is unique because you can't normally give away skill points. So backup lets you do that. And number 5 for freelancing is taking care of myself. When you are by yourself, reduce the difficulty of any ability roll that an ally has more dots in. You may burn a skill point to reduce the difficulty of any roll by 1. For the most part, my 5 dot abilities are all rolls made with regards to whatever this line is are at -1. Burn a skill point to make it -2. That's pretty much how it works for most of them. There are some that are a little different. Perfect Disguise lets you make it impossible for someone to see through a disguise unless you make it blatantly obvious, etc., etc. The big one here is that no one is allowed to play the Mastermind setup until later in the game. Maxwell plays the Mastermind, so he has the Mastermind skills, and he will accompany you on some of your first jobs, but for the most part, he doesn't really do anything later, except for maybe provide a little bit of backup. He switches from being a PC to an NPC to more of an ally or contact, and I wanted to naturally fade this character out. So I've done a lot of talking about the homebrews that I've done, but I haven't really done a lot of talking about homebrews in general. So what I like about homebrews is the ability to build whatever system or scenario or setting or whatever you want. The downside is having to mechanize all of it. If there's not a mechanic for it, you're going to have to make one, which involves testing and play testing and balancing and irritated players because you've taken something away from them, which is why you shouldn't do live testing on something that hasn't been play tested, etc., etc. I find that World of Darkness is a little bit easier to do this in because its kind of lax approach to specific mechanics make it very easy to build new systems and settings or new systems and machinations because they kind of use the same system. Everything kind of runs off of the roll some d10, and if you succeed, you succeed, and if you fail, you fail. There's not really a whole lot left to talk about. The basic premise of homebrewing is building exactly what you want, but there are some, we're going to say, specific complications when it comes to Pathfinder. And that is not only ensuring that things stay in balance, but double checking to make sure that things follow the core rule system. It kind of works like Magic the Gathering in that whatever you say overrides the core rules, but keep the core rules in mind. For example, weapons, in order to be magic, or rather in order to have a special magical bonus, have to have an enhancement bonus first. They have to be +1s or greater. And this is super duper duper important because some of them add their enhancement bonuses to things. And if you change the way that that mechanic works, some of those weapons that add their enhancement bonuses to other things, you could end up adding +0, making the thing completely and totally useless. So always keep in mind your core rules. Try and compartmentalize your individual rules changes as much as possible by making sure that your rules changes are easily recognized, easy to learn, or at least easy to explain, distinctly separate from the rules, and are compartmentalized. I screwed that up. But yeah, are compartmentalized. You can say, well, this game runs exactly like Mage, except these differences which overwrite these specific things. If the edges of where your homebrew starts and regular World of Darkness or whatever ends become blurry, then it becomes difficult to tell what's what. And sometimes you end up with issues where core rules interact with your rules in a really, really bad way. I can't think of a really, really good example of this, but when I was originally testing Wyverley College, I didn't have aptitude. I just let people roll their magics straight. Because I had forgotten that most of these abilities, or most of the vampire disciplines, I had to look at the character sheet, used an attribute to roll with. And I kind of forgot about that. And so my magic system was pretty crappy. Even with 5 dots in something, it was really hard. Sorry. To really do anything with, and it made the system kind of useless. And eventually, I got to the point where I remembered that Mage had a ret, which was a bonus to magic dice rolls and things like that. So I implemented a similar system called Aptitude. It was originally called Power, but I didn't think that through all the way. So after playtesting it like that, I switched it to Aptitude, and that's the way it stayed, and I find that I get really good results out of it. The dice rolls are smooth and even and aren't like a complete breakaway from everything else. It rolls the same, it acts the same, and it's pretty easy to kind of close your eyes and pretend that that's kind of how World of Darkness works. When you're making rule systems, try not to break away from the basics too much. There's a lot of things that you can break or mess up Like I said, I completely broke Magic so that it was unusable, not so that it was overpowered, but so that it was completely unusable, just from not paying attention. So do your playtesting, and if you're going to playtest something, don't playtest it by yourself. Give it to people who don't know, or who didn't help build it, and who don't know all the little nuances, because they're going to break it. They're either going to become overpowered with it, or they're going to make it no longer effective in any way. So I'm always playtesting ideas. I'm always changing the way that I build my my games. Fantastic example, again, back to Waverly College. Every race had their own method of regenerating mana, but because I wasn't paying too much attention while I was building them, they didn't follow any sort of system. So what I ended up doing was actually building a second sheet that gives a whole bunch of, and by a whole bunch I mean 6, different ways to get your mana back. Mana Weavers rest their mana back nightly. Spell Tappers drain it from nearby spell effects. Regenerators have to be near something of a specific energy type to get their mana back. Consumers have to physically eat it, or it has to stop existing for them to get it back. Allomancers, have to ingest a certain amount of metal. In this game, I don't make the metal specific to what magic you're using, but it is listed that the metal is toxic. So if you keep the metal in your body for too long, bad things happen to you. And if you'll pardon me on this one, I imported Stormlighters. I changed some of the things, but Stormlight does this really unique thing where once you have 0 mana pretty much all the time. You inhale Stormlight out of nearby sources. Once inhaled, Stormlight is held until the user begins to breathe. You can hold your breath under Stormlight for 1 round per stamina dot. At that point, Stormlight begins to burn away at the rate of 1 Stormlight point per round. Hey look, Sam is finally going to get in on this. Hello, cat. But yeah, so Stormlight begins to burn away from you. You don't get to hold on to it. This makes mana management and spell casting and stuff like that a very immediate priority, and I really like the way that that plays. But again, it's not required that you pick being a Stormlighter. So I've always play testing things and always trying to fix a lot of the issues that I break. Waverly College has some issues. World of Darkness has its own issues, in that you can build characters that can flip tanks right off the start, but in general, I really enjoy custom building World of Darkness settings, mostly because I don't have to change as much. I mean, this was basically take the mage sheet, get rid of Paradox, change mana a little bit, adjust magics just a tiny little bit, and then change the font so that it didn't look like a mage sheet. But that's pretty much all I have to say about homebrewing, in that it's a lot of fun, but you can blow stuff up if you're not super duper careful, and I say super duper careful, you don't have to be that careful. Thank you guys for coming out and watching another episode of Fluffy Talks Tabletop. I have no idea what we're going to do for the next one. Hopefully it's something at least relatively interesting. I know, right? So, you know, let me know in the comments or by messaging me or something if you want to see something specific. Thank you guys very much for watching another episode, and we will see you later.